Okay.
So today we are really excited. One, because we just finished installing 525 watts of solar in our Sprinter.
Another project down.
Yes. And two, thanks to our friends Caroline and Tad, we're renting this great new workspace to continue our van build.
Yeah, I can't underscore that one enough. We're really excited about the new workspace.
Yeah.
There's a lot of room in here, and it's just sort of our van building dream.
It is.
But that said, today we're going to walk through our solar installation. This is a project we're really excited to share because it ended up being a really simple installation. It was reasonably priced, and it's also a solution that's adaptable to various Sprinter models and build requirements. Okay, so before we get going, I want to take a quick step back. If you're new to our channel, right now we're in the process of converting our Sprinter van into a dream tiny home on wheels. Now, this is our first van build project and we're complete newbies, and that's kind of the point. The whole idea is for us to document our experience to share a newbie's perspective.
Yeah, so our goal is to provide inspiration and ideas to help you tackle your own van build project. And if you'd like to follow our series, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell below to be notified when new videos come out.
Right, so here's how we're going to tackle today's project. First, we'll start off with an overview of our solar setup, including our thought process for setting up our system. Next, we'll provide a complete step-by-step guide to our installation. And then finally, we'll wrap things up as always by providing some thoughts on what we learned and what we do differently next time.
Yeah, so in the description below, we'll include timestamped links to each step in the project, as well as a complete list of all the tools and parts that we used. So before we get started, we want to remind you that we're not professionals. That being said, if you're planning to do a similar project, make sure you do all your research, dot your I's, cross your T's. We'd hate to steer you in the wrong direction.
Okay, so it's easy to get lost in a seemingly endless sea of solar panel decisions. Monocrystalline versus polycrystalline, rigid panels versus flexible panels, how many watts do you need, what size panels, MPPT versus PWM, series versus parallel. It all can get a little bit overwhelming. So we tried to break our decision process down to three basic questions that need to be answered. The first is we wanted to figure out how basically we wanted to use our roof real estate. You know, there's a lot of ways we could use the real estate on the roof. We could use it for a full rack system. We could use it to add extra storage, AC, fans, solar, lights, awning. But at the end of the day, anything you put on the roof comes with certain drawbacks. Namely, it adds weight and it also adds wind resistance, and both of these things negatively impact handling. That said, we decided to limit our roof real estate to two high priority items: ventilation and solar power. Now, once we added our two max fans, that basically left us with a space that's approximately 188 inches long by 52 inches wide for our solar panels. So that then begs the next question, which is how much solar panel do we need? And there's a really simple answer, or at least we took a really simple approach, and that's we wanted to fit as much solar on the roof as possible. Now, to take a step back and clarify a little bit, I'll give you some background. Basically, in building our system, we wanted to have an electrical system that would allow us to travel off the grid the majority of the time. That said, we've got basically three different charging inputs for our system: solar, alternator power, and shore power. Now, because most of our travel is off the grid, solar is particularly important to us because solar means that we have to drive less and spend less time hooked up at campsites to meet our power needs. But the question still is, how much solar power do we need to fund our basic requirements? We went through the entire process of calculating this, and what we came up with was basically looking at a combination of our planned travel as well as our estimated daily average power consumption, that we would need basically something around 300 amp hours of lithium and at least 450 watts of solar. Now, rather than build our entire system around these estimates, we decided to take a more simplified approach. We set that as our baseline, and we assume that as long as we have enough solar power to meet that baseline, we'd be okay. But more is better. And the idea behind that is the more solar power we have, the less we have to worry about cloudy days, chasing snow in the wintertime, adding, that extra appliance. So then the next question is, which panels do we want to go with? Now, this gets really confusing because it's so easy to get lost in all the technical specs on solar panels. So initially, the first thing we did to narrow our search was we basically decided to only focus our attention on, rigid monocrystalline panels. Now, that alone gives us plenty of good options. But the second piece of that was we said, okay, well, what are the two basic goals we want to accomplish with the panels that we buy? And the first was we said, okay, well, let's just make sure that we buy quality panels that strike this kind of a nice middle ground, a balance between efficiency, reliability, and cost. And to do that, we basically said, okay, let's buy panels that are reasonably priced, they're manufactured by reputable manufacturers, and we have a minimum efficiency rating on our panels of at least 19%. Now, when we looked at panels, most of the panels we looked at had a rating of somewhere between 17 and 22%. But more is better, and 19 kind of put us in a good spot in the middle. Now, the second thing we want to accomplish, and this is the real tricky bit, is we wanted to make sure we found the right size panels. And by right size, I mean we wanted panels that, one, allowed us to fit as much power on the roof as possible, or as many watts in the roof and the available space we have as possible. And the second thing is we wanted to make sure that that the panels that we chose were sized to make installation as quick, easy, and turnkey as possible. And I'll talk about that more later when we get into the actual panels we chose. Okay, so I'm gonna confess, finding panels that ticked all the right boxes was a challenge, but we're really happy with the end result. We ended up with 525 watts of solar produced by 3 Renogy 175 watt monocrystalline panels that mount directly to our OEM roof rails using direct mount towers. Now, the Renogy panels do exactly what we were hoping. They strike this nice balance between cost and performance with a competitive price and efficiency rating of 19.8%. But what I really like about the Renogy panels are the dimensions. The dimensions are lined really closely with our Sprinter's roof width, as well as the placement of our OEM roof rails. Now, the translation of that is it makes our installation of the panels about as plug and play as you can get. There's no need to fabricate any custom roof racks or mounting systems, to bridge the gap between the panels and our roof rails. All we need to do is use our direct mount towers to bolt the panels directly to our OEM roof rails. Plus, the other big advantage is the Renogy panels are sized just perfectly to make the most of our available roof space. And basically what I mean by that is it allows us to cover the entire roof without having any unsightly overhang. So when you mount our panels to our Sprinter 170 with our 2 max fans, it basically ends up with enough space left over to reduce the risk of having fan shadows hitting the panels. So to mount our panels, we're using direct mount towers, which are going to bolt directly into our OEM roof rails. Now, the nice thing about these towers is they come in sets of 2 and include all the associated stainless steel hardware necessary to mount the towers both to the panels and the OEM roof rails. So to install our towers, the first thing we need to do is drill some holes in the bottom of our solar panel frame, which we're going to use to bolt the towers to the solar panels. Now, on a side note, Impact Products, which is the company that manufactures the towers, notes on their website that drilling holes in the Renogy frame does not void the warranty. That said, we did not verify this before we started drilling, so if you're concerned about warranty issues, I'd encourage you to confirm with Renogy before you start drilling. Okay, so this is the step that's probably the least plug and play of the whole solar panel installation process, but it's important. We basically need to make sure that when we drill our holes, we're drilling them in exactly the right place so that our solar panels, towers, and roof rails all line up during installation. It's easy enough, but it takes a bit of measuring and calculating to get right. Now, we found that the easiest way to do this is to create a template. We started off by creating a paper template, and we tried to mark our holes with that, but it was just too flimsy, so we ended up transposing that to a piece of cardboard, and that worked out really nicely. Okay, so to mark our holes, we placed our panels face down on a workbench in the order we plan to install them on the roof. And to keep everything straight, we noted the order on the backside of each panel so we could reference it during installation. Now, the important thing is when we laid out our panels, we made sure to position the panels so that the wiring in the backside of the panel is going to be located in the same side of the van as our electrical system. And the idea here is just to minimize the total length of wires required to connect our panels to the charge controller inside the van. This is important because it helps us to reduce our wiring costs and also potential power loss. With our panels laid out, we used our template to mark our holes with a Sharpie for each tower. With our holes marked, we're ready to drill. Now it's important to take care when drilling our holes in the solar panel frame so that we don't do anything that could damage the actual solar panel itself. This goes without saying, but it would be bad. So to avoid any accidents while drilling, we placed a piece of 1/2-inch plywood under the area where we're drilling to protect the panel. Another option would be to fit the drill with a stop collar to prevent the drill bit from going too deep and hitting the panel. Bottom line, proceed with caution.
Okay, so this step is completely optional. Think of it as a little bit of a vanity project. Renogy's 175 watt solar panels come in silver frames, which look fine, but our van is a dark gray, so we opted to paint our frames black so they blend in a little bit better with the van. Note we're only painting the frame, we're not painting the front or back of the panel. It's a pretty easy project, it just took a little bit of time. Painting involves 4 steps: sanding, masking, priming, and painting. First, we did a little sanding to help the paint adhere. Using a sanding block, we lightly sanded the aluminum frame, first with 80 grit paper, then with 220 grit. The Renogy frames have shallow grooves, so we took care to sand inside the grooves. Also, you may have noticed the blue plastic corners. If you're wondering, no, they're not removable. For the plastic corners, we used a Scotch-Brite pad to scuff the plastic surface. After we sanded, we'd wipe down the frames to remove any dust before masking. To mask, we first covered any holes in the frames. Next, we used builder's paper to cover the back and front of the solar panels, which we taped in place with painter's tape. Before painting, we primed the aluminum frames with Rust-Oleum self-etching primer. And for the blue plastic corners, we used Rust-Oleum adhesion promoter. After priming, we lightly sanded one more time with 400 grit paper before spraying each panel with 2 coats of Rust-Oleum and satin black. Afterwards, we let the paint dry for 24 hours before installing the panels.
Okay, so installing the panels was easy. That said, really the key here is to be as organized as possible. So the first thing we did was we inserted the bolts that came with our towers into our roof rail mounting tracks. We also worked out a plan for installation of our panels since each panel weighs about 20 pounds, which as you can imagine gets a bit unwieldy once you're up on the ladder. Ideally, we'd love to have installed all of our towers to our panels while we're still in the ground, and then install everything as one unit. But unfortunately, there's just 2 of us, and once all the panels are connected together, it weighs about 60 pounds, which would have been, let's say, difficult to get up on the roof of the van. Now, alternatively, what we chose to do was install our panels one at a time, starting at the rear and working our way forward. And to facilitate installation a little bit more, we partially mounted our towers by basically installing 4 towers to the rear panel, 2 towers to the front edge of our middle panel, and 2 towers to the front edge of our front panel. This solves for 24 of the 32 bolts that are required to fasten the towers to the solar panels. Importantly, we left some play in the bolts to allow wiggle room for adjustment during installation. Up on the roof, that left 8 additional bolts to install. Now the trick here is that there's not a lot of room for a wrench to install those 8 additional bolts. So what we found worked really well was to use a 7/16 ratcheting wrench to tighten everything up. Okay, so with the panels installed, the next step was to wire the panels together. Before wiring though, we had to cover the panels to make sure they aren't generating any electricity. Perhaps it goes without saying, but this is important. We don't want to work with live wires. Now, we opted to wire the panels in series, which made this step straightforward. Each panel has 2 wires, one positive and one negative, both with MC4 connectors. Using some spare boxes to create a workspace, we wired the panels together by connecting positive to negative, negative to positive. It's not so easy to make out what I'm doing in this video, so here's a quick diagram to illustrate. For added protection, we encased all wires in conduit, using zip ties to hold everything in place. After connecting the panels together, there's one positive and one negatively left over, which need to be connected to our charge controller inside the van. To do this, we added 2 extra links of wire which run through a wiring gland on the roof. Now, there are a couple of decisions that need to be made to select the right wire. 1, we need to determine how many feet of wire we need. And 2, we need to determine what gauge wire to use. To answer these questions, we need to measure the distance between the positive and negative leads in the solar panel and the mounting location for the charge controller inside the van. These measurements will help us determine 1, how much wire we need, and 2, what gauge wire to use. Renogy has a useful wire gauge calculator on their website, which makes calculating the right gauge easier. Selecting the right wire gauge is important, not only because selecting a gauge that's too small can be dangerous, but because it can reduce panel efficiency. When in doubt, it's better to go with a larger wire gauge. For our setup, we selected 10 HEW wire with MC4 connectors installed at one end. This made hooking up our wires to our solar panels a plug-and-play process. With our wires connected, only one step remained. We needed to route the wires through the roof using a waterproof wiring gland. We opted to use 2 Blue Sea cable clams, which are designed for marine applications. To install the cable clam, you drill a hole in the roof of the van that's big enough to run your wire through it. Then you mount the cable clam over the hole and run the wire through the cable clam. The clam uses a gasket, which when tightened creates a watertight seal. Installing the cable clam involves basically 2 steps. The first step is to basically drill a hole through the cable clam's rubber gasket so that we can slip the gasket over the cable. To do this, we measure the wire diameter and select a drill bit that matches the measurement. While drilling, the instructions recommend pouring water over the gasket and help get a clean cut. We spoke to Blue Sea, and they also recommend using a very sharp drill bit. And as an added tip, Blue Sea suggested placing the gasket in the freezer for a couple of hours before drilling, as the harder rubber is easier to cut cleanly. After cutting the hole, we took an additional step. We cut a 1/2-inch piece of birch plywood into a small backing plate, which fits directly below the cable clam and the underside of the roof. The point here is to provide some additional support for the cable clam's mounting screws, as our Sprinter roof has a really thin layer of metal. Okay, with the cable clams ready, we drilled 2 small holes in the roof for our wires to pass through and added some primer to prevent rust. To do this, we drilled a pilot hole which we expanded using a step bit. Note that we also added pilot holes for each of the cable clam's 4 mounting screws. After drilling, we applied 2 coats of Rust-Oleum for each of the holes. As an added precaution, we placed 2 grommets inside our wire holes to help protect the wires from chafing. Now it's just a matter of running our wires and screwing everything in place. one final note. If you don't immediately connect your solar system to the charge controller, be sure to cap the ends of your wires to avoid the potential for electrocution.
Okay, so our panels are installed and we're ready to proceed with the rest of our electrical system.
Yay!
Yay! Overall, this is one of the easier projects that we've had this far, and for difficulty, I think I'd give it about a 3 out of 5. Maybe a 2 out of 5 just for the installation.
Yeah, I mean, I think what consumed all of our time in this project wasn't the installation. It was just trying to figure out solar systems, understanding wiring, and just researching which panels we were going to choose to meet our goals. I think the actual installation process itself was really, really easy. And that's in large part due to this combination of using direct mount towers with the OEM roof rails and the right side solar panel. So we're really happy with that, and it's a great option for Sprinter vans.
Yeah, so I guess that begs the question, what will we do differently this time? Yeah,
We've always got something
we
to do.
And I don't think we would do anything differently this time. We're really happy with the way it turned out. We're happy with the end result and the ease of installation.
Yeah, I mean, that all went really, really well. So as a reminder, if you're interested in kind of doing this type of installation yourself, be sure to check out our description below for links to all the tools and products we used. And if you'd like to know how to install OEM roof rails, we've got the complementing video for that process, and we'll provide a link to that below as well.
And if you like this video, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us a thumbs up. And somewhere around me, we will have a link to check out more videos in our van build playlist.
Yeah, so I think that's it. We are a little bit punch drunk at this point. We can hardly talk. This is not the first time we've tried to make this wrap up.
Nope.
It was harder than the entire project itself. So I think that's a wrap. We're finished. We will see you in the next one.
All right, bye guys.
All right, see you later.